up so I can see you. Um, Welcome to our LinkedIn Live on Navigating Career Uncertainty. I'm so happy you could join us. I'm going to give it a few moments because I know that people will be trickling in. But just to get things started, my name is Amanda Augustine. I'm a certified professional career coach, resume writer, and the resident career expert for Career.io and its suite of brands. I have over 20 years of experience helping professionals of all stages and ages advance their careers and land the right job sooner. And today, I am happy to be joined by Raymond Lee, the founder and president of Careerminds, a Career.io company and global provider of contemporary outplacement, leadership, and career development solutions. Not only does he have over 25 years of human resource, outplacement, and career coaching experience, but he is also an industrial and organizational psychologist and a certified retirement coach. So basically, Raymond, you can handle anything and everything that comes your way.
Pretty much, I guess.
I'm so glad we could get together today. Before we get started, I want to encourage everyone listening to introduce themselves in the comments section. I like to turn every LinkedIn Live into a potential networking opportunity. So please don't be shy. If you haven't already, in the comments, introduce yourself, what you're looking for, and why you're here listening in. Also, while there are certain topics that Raymond and I are hoping to touch upon, we want to incorporate as many of your questions into the conversation as possible. So please post your questions in the comments. I can see them as they're coming in, and we'll try our best to cover them. Last but not least, please take a moment to go to careerminds.com/gov, G-O-V, to download a free copy of our guide on navigating career uncertainty, which we created for those federal employees whose careers are in transition. Everyone who downloads the guide will be entered into a raffle to win a free resume rewrite by one of our professional writers. Again, that URL is careerminds.com/gov, and I will be announcing the winner at the end of this week. Now, Raymond, we've all been reading the headlines. The furloughs, the department shutdowns, the involuntary layoffs, the deferred resignations. It's no wonder that so many people are feeling so anxious about their futures. You and I have previously spoken about coping with job loss, particularly unexpected job loss. And I'm just curious, what advice do you have for those who have very recently lost their jobs or are worried that that loss is imminent?
Well, first, Amanda, thank you so much for hosting this event and having me on. I think it's great that we're coming together to provide support to, anyone who's feeling uncertain. One of our missions is really to, reduce stress for people who are facing potential job loss. And I think that, there is a lot of uncertainty, whether you're a federal worker or you're even in the corporate world. There's been layoffs recently announced there as well. And, I think for anyone who's listening here today, you're probably you're falling into two sort of situations. One is you're sitting at work and you're hearing about layoffs and you still have a job and you're wondering, am I going to get the call? Am I going to be next? And the question is, okay, what do I do with that feeling? And then the second scenario is the one that you described, is that you recently were notified that your job's eliminated or your department's been shut down and you don't have a job to go to tomorrow morning. In both scenarios, they're incredibly stressful. And I think that, one thing that I believe we can all agree is change is happening all around us. And
whether we like it or not.
We're not going to, exactly. And we're not going to be able to control that, whether you're in a company or you're in a government role, change is happening. And so the question is like, how do I control it? Like, what can I do today to control what I want to do? And I like to think that the change is external, but the transition and the process of how you internalize all the change is internal. So you have control over that. If you are So in terms of the advice, if you're someone who is feeling that uncertainty and you feel like your job could be eliminated, what are things that you can do today that allow you to sort of be proactive in putting things into place so that when something does potentially happen, you're not behind the eight ball and you're not trying to play catch up. And what I like to say is, a lot of times people are like, I'm going to update my resume. That's the first thing that I'm going to do.
Hmm.
I would advise people to reach out to your network because it's your network who are going to be the ones that help you land in that next job. So I always say start networking, um, get off the hamster wheel, make some phone calls, meet with some people, and share what it is you do. What do you like to do? And so start that networking now and don't wait until you hit that notice where now you're starting to put things into action.
Oh, I think that's great advice. I love what you said, Raymond, about trying to put into perspective what is outside of your control, and there's nothing you can do about that, and kind of accepting that, and what is within your control. And part of that is how you react to it. Um, I always say that job loss is a loss. Even if you hated your job loss is a loss, and it's worth mourning. I actually read this one statistic that said that it can take 2 years to get over the feelings associated with being laid off. And as someone who's gone through that before,
Hmm.
that rings true. That tracks. That, there's parts of you that are bitter and sad, and you go through all the stages of mourning, just as if you lost a loved one. You're losing your job, and for those who really consider their jobs to be part of their identities,
Hmm.
that's difficult.
Yeah.
But that said, we got to jump into what can you control, and that's, if whether the job's gone already or you think it's going to be gone, how do you start preparing for that transition?
Yeah. Well, and I would, if I can comment though,
Yeah.
on that loss, I think everyone's situation is unique.
Yeah.
You could be a worker who's been in the job for 30 years, 20 years. You've been in this job. Maybe you even had this visual that you were going to retire, from the
Yeah.
government or from a company. And the level of grief is associated with how much loss actually occurred. And so, if you're someone who just lost their job 2 years ago and you've gone through that process, you already have that experience of what it's
Yeah.
like, right? So, getting out there and looking for a job, that transition is going to be a lot smoother. But then there's other factors that play into how quickly you can get to that acceptance, right? Like when you think
Yeah.
of this 5 stages of grief, how are you going to get to that acceptance and move on?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a process, and everyone's situation is different. You have family things that are happening that could impact that. And so, it's important to recognize all of those factors.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree. Um, so let's talk about what can be done. What can be done now that you've now I'm always going to say, now that you've processed that loss and processed that grief and moved on, but let's be honest that you are carrying some of that with you regardless of if
Mm.
this has happened recently. And we know that so many people, especially those that have been affected by DOGE and its initiatives, for a lot of those individuals, we're looking at a major transition out of the public sector and into the private sector. Or even if you're going to go towards nonprofit, you're still going from the government into a nonprofit, and there are still adjustments that need to be made. So I'd love to jump into some of what are the things we can control, and maybe some of the first steps. One thing you mentioned was maybe not jump in and start writing that resume right away.
Mm. Yeah, I would even say before that, I was just talking to a former government worker earlier this week. He was with the IRS and he was a forensic specialist. And so he was the person who did a lot of the investigations around, tax fraud and things like that.
Hmm.
And he spent 25 years working for the IRS as a forensics agent, and he ended up transitioning and moving into work for a company who was on the other side, an accounting firm, where they brought him in because of his expertise. So, you think about those transferable skills. What are the skills that you are doing today? So specifically, if we're talking about someone in the federal government, what are the skills that you're doing today in your job that would transfer to the private sector? And then start really identifying those things. This is well before you start applying it into a resume, because there are skills that you're
Yep.
doing that would align with a company and organization on the private side.
I totally agree. One of the things I like to do when I'm trying to set somebody up for success with their job search, because let's be honest, even if you're employed and happy but exploring other options, it is an overwhelming process. It's an undertaking. We always say it's a full time job. And so, what I like to tell people is to try and break it down into three stages that make it a little bit more digestible. And it's very much like a sales or marketing funnel. We have prep, search, and close. Prep is identifying your target opportunities. What types of roles are a good fit for you? And then building your marketing materials
Mhm.
around that goal to support them. Search is the pursuit of leads, and that's through recruiters, job applications, and networking. And then close, all about closing the deal. That is the prep, the actual interview process, the follow up to interviewing, and even the onboarding process, the first 3 months of a new job. Because I always say the first 3 months of a new job is an extension of the interview process. You're still filling out that employer, and they're still filling you out to make sure you both made the right decision. So if we look at it that way, when we're in that prep phase, that's really what we're talking about right now. And before you can even prep those materials, it's inventorying your skills and experience. So, one exercise I would urge everyone to do is either take a copy of your current resume or just take a Google Sheet, a Google Doc, a piece of paper, and put in one column the roles you've held, one after another. In the second column, you're going to write down all the skills, hard and soft skills you applied to that role. What did you need to have in order to do that job? And that's the very kind of general stuff, such as really strong written communication, leadership, sales, persuasion, and it can be down to the specific knowledge you needed to have as well. And then in the last column, I want you to almost split it up, or you can make it two columns. What did you really enjoy about your work in nitty gritty detail? And what did you really not enjoy about that work in nitty gritty detail? And by going through this exercise for each role you've held, and if you've been in the same job for a very long time, then it might be even phases of that job as your level of responsibility changed, or even perhaps if your manager or the team you worked with changed, that may also affect how you felt about that role and what skills you were using or not using. But putting that into perspective, you can then start looking for the themes in what are the skills that I'm really great at? What are the skills that I've had to use, but I'm not so great at? What am I truly interested in? And if I'm targeting future employers, what are things I want to look out for, either because it's good and I know I enjoy that type of environment, or I've learned that this type of management style or this type of environment does not work so well for me. But it can help you start to truly assess and open a very wide umbrella of what could I potentially be looking at. So then I can start exploring options with this information and kind of narrow down my choices.
Amanda, I love that sort of skills inventory. And as you were kind of describing the tactics of identifying your skills and sort of what you like, what you don't like, where my mind went to is skill gaps.
Yes.
And I can only help but think there's people who are like, oh my gosh, there's the skills that are required today are not the things that I'm doing today. And so there's some anxiety around whether you have the right skill sets today. Obviously, with AI and digital transformation, the skills today are so very different. And so if you're
Yeah.
someone who's sitting there feeling really anxious about whether you have the right skills, consider looking at ways to bridge the gap. And what I would say is start reading articles of things that are happening in your industry or even the industry that you're in.
Target industry.
Listen to podcasts, follow thought leaders in your industry on LinkedIn, because it's those sort of things that people are sharing around what are the trends. Those are the things that you're going to be using in interviews, on your resume. And quite frankly, it may be a certificate that you have to go to get through a LinkedIn Learning to sort of kind of bridge those skill gaps. So all of that work that you're doing is the preparation that ultimately will lead to you landing in a job down the road.
No, 100%. And I love when you were talking about, I think some people might say, okay, but I'm not too sure what those skill gaps are because I'm not too sure where I should go next, particularly if I need to move to a different sector, or I'm not even sure what sector would be the right one for me. So there are a few things that I'd love to share in terms of how you can start identifying where some of the most realistic or smoother transitions into other industries or sectors and how you can identify some of those. I was talking with a journalist not that long ago for a piece on the federal worker transition, and she was like, "Well, what skills are transferable?" And it really depends. I mean, what were you doing? What agency or department were you part of? There's no finite answer there, and there's also no finite way to say, "Oh, this is the industry where these individuals should be looking." So I do want to target some strategies everyone can use to identify, even if you have nothing to do with the federal government, but you need or want to make a shift, understanding where some of those shifts might be most applicable. One thing I like to do is run an advanced search on LinkedIn. And so if you have been neglecting your LinkedIn profile and your network, this is the time to start fleshing that out again, making it up to date, as well as connecting with anyone and everyone that you haven't connected with in the past. And that could be anyone you worked with, dealt with, friends, friends of friends, family members. The larger your network is, the more likely you have a loose connection to a company or an industry that's of interest to you. So I like to run advanced searches on people who previously worked for the same organization as me or something similar, a competitor. And I want to see those people that previously worked there but had already moved on at least a year ago. Where are they today? Where are these people where their past employer is listed as my employer, or a competitor of that? And now let's look and see, where have these people moved on? You can do the same thing with clients that you've worked with or vendors you've worked with, to see where they've gone as well, or if they're still thriving in that organization. These will give you ideas of where your experience would be understood and accepted, as well as what types of roles you might be able to move into. It's also giving you leads on individuals that you could potentially set up informational interviews with. So, an informational interview is one of my absolute favorite networking techniques that is so underutilized and is especially helpful if you're looking to make a major change or you're new to the workforce in general. It's where you're identifying somebody who's either already working in a field that you're interested in, a company you're interested in, or a type of role that interests you. And you want to set up 10 minutes over the phone. If it's someone you know well, maybe you're getting together in person, or over Zoom for more than 10 minutes, but we're asking for a very small ask that has a very little commitment from them on the other end. So they're more willing to accept it. And you are setting up time to speak with this individual to basically say, I'm exploring opportunities. I saw you're doing X, Y, and Z. I would love to learn more about that. How did you get into that? Hey, we both came from the same background. What parts of your experience were really important to them? What were the gaps in your skills that you needed to fill? So these conversations are really helpful in understanding potential career paths for you, but also what those skill gaps or knowledge gaps may be and different ways you could try and fill those. So
Mm.
keep that in mind. I
Amanda,
also,
I love that. I love how you just empowered the person to set up these informational interviews to get information. So you're not asking for a job.
No.
I think the most important takeaway is when you do an informational interview and you're reaching out to your network, don't lead with, hey, can I send you my resume? And if you hear of something, you will never get anyone who's going to respond to you. But at the end of that informational interview, ask them, who are three people in your network that I should be speaking with? And ask them, because once the informational interview is done, you're going to get whatever things that you find helpful. And obviously, they know that you're looking for a job. You don't have to ask them to keep you in mind if something comes up. They will definitely do that. But at the end of that, just ask them, who are people in your network that I should be talking to? Not for a job, but who in the industry I can get additional information that's going to educate me of
Yeah.
what's happening.
Yeah. What events should I be attending? What
Mm.
professional associations should I be looking into? What influencers should I be following? And this also can help you when you need to translate your resume and LinkedIn profile into terms your new target employer will understand and appreciate. And I think that's a big part of it. I already said when you approach the job search, we want to put on a sales or marketing mentality and really think of it as like a sales pipeline. But also, this is incredibly important when you're trying to prepare your marketing collateral. It's what I call it, your resume, your LinkedIn profile, to make sure they're framed for now your new target audience, whatever type of employers you are currently pursuing. So, one thing to keep in mind, especially if you worked in the federal government and there was a very strict kind of set of guidelines that resume needed to follow, the detail in it is very different. The terminology is different, and the length is typically different than your average corporate employee's resume. So instead of thinking of your resume as a transcript of everything you've ever done and could have done, we want to think of it as a piece of marketing. It is a carefully curated document that is highlighting and emphasizing the parts of your experience and your skill sets that are most relevant to the type of work you're looking for now, and maybe downplaying or omitting some of the details that are not relevant. I'm not saying necessarily delete roles so that you have gaps in your history, but you're going to decide how much information you're going to share about a certain role or even a responsibility when you think of it in terms of how does it relate to what I'm trying to do now. One thing that's really working in favor of everyone who's trying to make a major shift is that we've seen this trend in the last few years where employers are really focused on skill-based hiring. So they're more interested in knowing what skills can you bring to the table and how can you demonstrate that you possess those skills. And they're placing a little less emphasis on your education and your traditional, career trajectory. And that works really well for those that are trying to make some sort of transition. I'm not saying you totally switch to what's known as a functional resume. And if you don't know what that is, don't even worry about it. But what I think is really important is if you've spoken to people, reviewed job descriptions online, looked at advanced searches, and you've identified some roles that make sense for you and you've identified what are those skills, hard and soft, that are really required for this role, you want to make sure as part of the top third of your resume, you maybe have that skill and then a colon, and you talk about how you've leveraged that in the past. So you're basically giving them a preview of what they're going to find in your work experience that really emphasizes the skills that you bring to the table that are most related to the role you're now pursuing. Um, the other thing, and we didn't really talk about it, but it's reframing the experience in terms that a prospective employer is going to understand and appreciate. And I do want to make sure that we cover that because, especially for those that come from a very technical world or have been working within the federal government or any of its agencies for some time, uh, I want you to think back to when you were talking to a relative who knows nothing about what you do, and you had to explain in very generic terms what you're responsible for doing, how you ultimately help people do, how do you get a star at the end of the day from your work? You want to kind of keep that in the back of your mind when you are translating your experience. If you're trying to go into a different industry, you want to try and remove some of that very, very technical jargon that only someone from your world is going to understand, and speak to it in more generic terms. I was doing a lot of research online trying to figure out, are there any really great tools out there that translate? ONet has one, One Career Stop has one. You know, the Truman Library and Museum has a pretty good glossary. But ironically, I found the Santa Monica College has a page, and I will go back if anybody wants it. Message me because I don't have it in front of me right now. But I found a link where they took very specific, not just military but government terms, and basically provided the civilian equivalents, so you would have a better understanding of how you can reframe some of your experience in terms that a civilian employer would really understand. And then something else that I think is worth throwing out there is that it doesn't hurt to also look into employers such as defense contractors and other contractors that are related to the government that are still thriving, that actually do understand this terminology. So that's another route that's worth looking into. I want to make sure that we're getting, so I'm going to scroll right now through questions just to see if anybody has posted anything. Again, I want to remind everyone, please, if you have a question, put it in the comments, and I'm going to try and scroll through and see if there's anything that we can go into a little bit more. Also, for those of you who may have joined a little later, if you go to careerminds.com/gov, G-O-V, you can download a free guide that we created specifically for federal workers who are facing uncertainty in their careers. It goes into everything from thinking about your finances to exploring the various different routes you can go. And everyone who downloads it will automatically be put into a raffle. And we are going to choose one of those individuals to get a free resume rewrite by one of our professional writers. And if I call you or tell you that you're the person who won it and you don't need it, you can gift it to someone else. That's fine as well. So if you're maybe watching this for a friend or a loved one because they were unable to and you want to help them, you can also gift that rewrite if you don't necessarily need it. But keep that in mind. I'm looking through just to see if there are any questions right now. Don't notice so much that it loses its attention. Yes, Steve Levy. Okay, Steve, I haven't talked to you in forever. Love to see you're on here. He's amazing, by the way, an amazing experienced recruiter. Steve, if I'm right, you do a lot primarily in the tech field. And to his point, don't generalize your experience so much that an employer won't appreciate what you did. But make sure that if it's so one of the solutions maybe there is that if there's something that's very technical in terms, you might put a translation in parentheses or vice versa, depending on the audience that you're targeting. And it depends on what role you're going for as well. Again, there are certain positions out there that are looking for your government experience. If you have security clearances, that stuff should be on there. That is highly desirable. So keep that in mind. You want to make sure that you're not losing any of that. I'm just looking through here right now to see if there's anybody else who focus on what you know versus what you feel. Wes, that's such a good comment. Christina, you're right. Yes, it can definitely feel longer. Yeah, nonprofits are challenging. I know that a lot of people think that it is an easier transition, right? It's still public sector, but a lot of nonprofits, there's a trickle down effect here. They're also being affected and they're also seeing cuts. So that is definitely something to be aware of. I'm seeing someone who's bilingual, and I would say make sure that's emphasized. That is something that I would put within the professional summary at the top of the resume, as well as within the skills section or language section at the bottom. Make sure if you're multilingual, trilingual, bilingual, make sure that's noted, as well as the languages and how proficient you are. That's incredibly important. Are there any questions that we can help answer? Anything that you were hoping to get out of this today that we didn't cover? I know it's a lot. You work in all areas, including GovCon and not just tech. Steve, All right. He says, don't explain it like you'd explain it to your grandmother. Fair enough. But I want you to get but if you're having trouble piecing it down, it is a great way to start. Fair enough. Um, are there any other questions or any closing remarks? Because I know we're hitting around that ending point. Raymond, is there anything that you'd like to close with? Any thoughts on either how you keep yourself motivated during a challenging job search, or any major do's and don'ts that you want people to remember
Yeah.
as we're exiting?
Yeah, I appreciate all the comments. I just read one around the resource, the 20-minute networking meeting by Marcia Ballinger. I hadn't heard of that, and I think it's great to sort of think about what's the framework of that networking meeting, and then practicing what you were just describing, Amanda, around what it is you do in the job, and then ask them, does that make sense? And and then ask for feedback. So I think it's a good way to practice. The thing that I would say in closing is the feelings that you have related to the uncertainty of potentially losing your job or even afterwards. Those are all, normal feelings that you experience. And I just encourage people to take care of yourself,
Yeah.
get sleep and exercise and spend time with family, spend time with your kids, and don't isolate yourself and really internalize all of this and think it's going to go away. And I think if we're here, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to connect with anyone. So, want to support anyone that has, any questions or needs any help.
Yeah. Yeah, don't hold it in. That's a very good point. Charmaine, yes, connect away. I'm happy to connect with anybody. If there's a question we didn't get to, feel free to reach out to me and we'll try and summarize those in a post that I'll post to make sure Career Minds reposts as well. Something that also occurred to me, Raymond, when you were talking about, don't isolate and that sort of thing. It may, yes, get the support, leverage your support system around you, but I also like finding a job search peer, especially
Mm,
because we know so many departments, agencies, full teams have been laid off or furloughed or, are going through this. Yes, you may be working in the same department, you may have similar skill sets, but the odds that you are both absolutely perfect and want the exact same job are probably a little slimmer than you actually realize. And so if you partner with somebody and you check in once a week with each other, you have a designated time where you check in both mentally, but also, okay, what are you doing? What are you working on? Hey, I found this great resource. Um, I want to share this with you. Oh, have you checked out that job board? I just found that. That's great. You are going to combine your efforts. You're both going to have more support and more resources available for your job search. I 100% believe that truly helps because, yes, your family is there for you. Your friends are there for you. But somebody who's living and going through it, the exact same type of loss, can really feel supportive.
that's great advice.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us. A very heartfelt. We are truly wishing the best for you. If there are any other tools that you think of, please put them in the comments. I will try and do a roundup of everything we've seen. Steve, I know you mentioned one up there, but I kind of missed it. So I will try and look for that in the comments. We'll summarize that and put it out to everybody if you haven't already. And if you know someone who couldn't join, please let them know. Anybody who registers at careerminds.com/gov and downloads the guide, I will be picking a winner at the end of this week. So anybody who's downloaded it will be in the running for that. And again, you can gift it if you don't personally need it, but you can get a free rewrite in addition to getting access to the guide that we put together. I wish you all the very best. Thank you so much. And if there are any other topics you'd like us to cover moving forward, either on this channel or another one, I do a few of these now. Please let us know, and we'll certainly keep them in mind as we're planning our future LinkedIn Live events. But thank you so much for coming. Have
Thanks,
a
Amanda.
great rest of your day. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Raymond. I appreciate it. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.